Emma Calloway had a rule about courthouse coffee. She never bought it from the vending machine on the second floor because it tasted like warm cardboard dissolved in regret. And she never bought it from the cart near the east entrance because the man who ran it talked for exactly 11 minutes every single time, regardless of how long the line behind her grew. She bought it from the small cafe tucked into the ground floor lobby, a place called Perch, run by a woman named Dolores who had been making espresso since before Emma was born, and who somehow always knew what people needed before they ordered. That particular Tuesday morning in late October, Emma needed something strong enough to strip paint. She had been at the office since 6 in the morning, reviewing 3 boxes of financial disclosure documents for the Mercer custody case. A case that had started as routine and had slowly transformed into the kind of legal knot that made senior partners cancel their golf weekends. Glenn Briggs, her boss, and the man who had given her a chance when every bigger firm passed on her application, had called her into his office the previous afternoon with the expression of a man delivering difficult news. "Daniel Hargrove is opposing counsel," Glenn had said. Leaning back in his chair in the way he did when he was trying to appear calm and failing, Emma had looked up from her notepad. "Say that again? You heard me?" "Hargrove and Associates. Daniel personally." She had heard the name, of course. Everyone in family law had heard the name. Daniel Hargrove was the kind of attorney whose reputation arrived in a room before he did. 3 consecutive years named the top litigation attorney in New York for family and civil cases. A win rate that people quoted in legal circles the way sports fans quoted batting averages. He had reportedly made a junior judge so flustered during cross-examination that the judge had requested a recess to collect himself, which was something Emma had assumed was a legal urban legend until 2 separate colleagues confirmed it independently. "He is going to come after every document we file," Glenn had said. "Every comma, every citation. You need to be ready." "I am ready," Emma had said. And she had believed it at the time. Standing at the Perch counter the next morning with her coffee order in hand and 2 hours of sleep behind her eyes, she believed it slightly less. Dolores set the cup down with a gentle thud. "You look like you are fighting someone bigger than you." "Something like that," Emma said. "Then drink it all." No sipping. Emma took the coffee and turned toward the lobby seating area, intending to review her notes before the 9 o'clock pretrial hearing. The lobby was filling up slowly. Lawyers in dark suits crossing the marble floor with the particular stride that courthouses seem to produce, a mix of confidence and suppressed anxiety that Emma had always found equal parts admirable and absurd. She found a seat near the window, opened her legal pad, and began reading her own handwritten notes from the night before. The Mercer case centered on a custody dispute between Claire Mercer and her former husband, Raymond. Claire was Emma's client through Glenn's firm. Raymond had money, connections, and apparently the good sense to hire the most feared attorney in the city to represent him. Emma underlined a statute reference and circled a note about financial asset disclosure timing. She was so absorbed that she did not notice the man who sat down 2 chairs away until he spoke. You circle things when you disagree with them or when you want to remember them. She looked up. The man was looking at her notepad with mild curiosity, not rudely. Simply the way someone asks a question when they genuinely want to know the answer. He was tall, even-seated, with dark hair, a jaw that looked like it had been drawn with a ruler, and eyes that were a quiet shade of brown that somehow managed to look like they were taking notes, independently of whatever his face was doing. His suit was charcoal gray and fit the way suits fit, when they are made for a specific person rather than adjusted for one. Emma glanced down at her pad. She had circled approximately 9 things in the last paragraph. "Both," she said. "Circling is efficient." He nodded slowly, as if this were a reasonable and thoughtful answer. "Daniel Hargrove," he said, and extended his hand. Emma felt the name land in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. She kept her expression completely neutral through what she privately considered a heroic act of professional self-control. Shook his hand once, firmly, and said, "Emma Calloway." "Caldwell and Briggs." Something moved across his face, brief and unreadable. Glenn's firm, she confirmed. "I see." He settled back in his chair with the ease of a man who was never uncomfortable anywhere. I suppose we will be seeing a great deal of each other over the next few weeks. I suppose we will, Emma said, and returned her eyes to her notepad with deliberate calm. She did not look up again until she heard him stand. And by then, he was already walking toward the elevator bank, hands in his pockets, unhurried. As if the whole city moved at whatever pace he decided was appropriate. Emma sat very still for a moment. Then she uncapped her pen and wrote his name at the top of a fresh page. Underlined it twice and began noting everything she had just observed. The way he had looked at her notepad rather than her face. The precision of his question. The ease that was not arrogance exactly, but was something adjacent to it. A quality that came from never having been genuinely surprised by anything for a very long time, she wrote. He watches before he speaks and underlined it. The pretrial hearing that morning was held in Judge Whitmore's courtroom on the 4th floor. Judge Whitmore was 61 years old, had seen approximately everything, and wore the expression of a man who had stopped being impressed by lawyers somewhere around his 3rd decade on the bench. He ran his courtroom with the efficiency of someone who genuinely had better things to do, which Emma respected enormously. Glenn presented their initial motions with the careful competence that had made him a respected name in the field. Emma sat at his right, organizing documents, passing notes, tracking every word. She had prepared a short supporting statement about the financial disclosure timeline, and Glenn nodded when she passed it forward. Then Daniel stood. Emma had watched many good attorneys. She had studied their rhythms, their patterns, the specific ways that truly skilled advocates controlled the temperature of a room. But watching Daniel Hargrove address Judge Whitmore was something different. He did not raise his voice. He did not use dramatic pauses or theatrical gestures. He simply spoke with a clarity and precision that made everything around him seem slightly louder by comparison. Every sentence arrived complete and fully formed. Every citation was exact. Every logical step landed before the previous one had finished settling. Judge Whitmore, who Emma had never once seen show visible appreciation for anything a lawyer said, wrote something on his notepad when Daniel finished a particular argument about asset valuation timing. That detail registered in Emma like a small alarm. She passed Glenn a note. He anticipated our disclosure argument. He already has a counterfiled. Glenn read it, and his jaw tightened slightly. He wrote back, I know, after the hearing in the hallway outside the courtroom. Glenn pulled Emma aside while the other parties dispersed. He is very good, Glenn said. Yes, Emma agreed. We need to be better. I know, she said. Glenn looked at her for a moment with the particular expression he used when he was deciding how much to say. Emma, I need you to know that if this gets complicated, if the pace of this case becomes more than one attorney and one paralegal can reasonably manage, I'm going to fight for more resources. But right now, you are what I have. And honestly, you are better than most of what I could bring in. Emma nodded once. She understood what he was saying, and she appreciated that he said it plainly. She went back to Perch at noon, ordered a second coffee, and spent 45 minutes reading every publicly available record she could find on Daniel Hargrove's last 12 cases. She was looking for a pattern, a tell, something he returned to when cases were close. She found it in his closing arguments. He consistently built toward a single emotional focal point, always late in the argument, never at the start. It was masterful, and it was consistent, and consistency, Emma knew from years of watching good lawyers, was both a strength and a map. She was writing the last of her notes when a shadow crossed the page again. She looked up. Daniel was standing at the counter with his own coffee. He was looking at her across the cafe with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Not smiling, not assessing. Something in between. Something that felt almost like recognition. He raised his cup slightly in her direction. A small, unhurried gesture. Emma looked back at her notepad, capped her pen, and gathered her papers. She was not going to give him the satisfaction of looking flustered, because she was not flustered. She was focused. And those were two entirely different things that she intended to keep firmly separate for as long as this case lasted. She stood, picked up her coffee, and walked out of Perch without looking back. It was only when she reached the elevator that she realized she was smiling slightly and had no good explanation for it. She pressed the button for the 3rd floor, straightened her jacket, and told herself firmly that Daniel Hargrove was the opposition, that his reputation was a fact and not a challenge, and that she was going to approach this case the way she approached every case, methodically, carefully, and without distraction. She almost believed all of it. The elevator opened, and she stepped inside, already composing the first lines of a new motion in her head, already thinking 3 steps forward the way Glenn had taught her to think, already planning. But somewhere underneath all of that planning, in a place she was not quite ready to examine, something had shifted. Something small and inconvenient had taken root in the quiet space between seeing a person and understanding that they were going to matter. Emma pressed the button for her floor and watched the doors close. Outside in the lobby, Daniel stood at the perch counter and looked at the door through which she had disappeared with the expression of a man encountering something genuinely unexpected for the first time in longer than he could easily remember. He drank his coffee, he thought about circles. The mediation order from Judge Whitmore arrived on a Thursday morning and landed on Emma's desk with the particular weight of something that was going to change her week entirely. She read it twice, set it down, picked it up again, and then walked to Glenn's office, where she found him sitting with his head tilted back and a wet cloth across his forehead. "Glenn, I know," he said without moving. "You look terrible. I feel worse than I look, which is impressive given the feedback you just offered." Emma stepped inside and closed the door. "The mediation sessions start Monday. Both legal teams, 3 hours a day, conference room at the Whitmore building. Judge wants a joint report by the end of the week." She paused. "You cannot be there like this. I will be fine by Monday. You have a fever of 102 degrees. I checked the thermometer on your desk." Glenn lowered the cloth and looked at her with the expression of a man who wanted to argue but was too tired to organize the words properly. "Emma, Hargrove is going to be in that room. He is going to come in with his full team and 300 pages of counter documentation and that particular expression he has that makes junior attorneys reconsider their career choices." "Know what expression you mean?" Emma said. "I have seen it, and I am still here, which I believe is the relevant data point." Glenn studied her for a long moment. Outside his window, the city moved in its usual indifferent way. Taxis and pedestrians, and the distant sound of a construction site that had been running for so long it had become part of the ambient noise of the street. He lowered the cloth entirely and sat forward. "You have everything. Every document, every motion, every note from our prep sessions." "I have all of it," she confirmed. "If he pushes on the asset valuation timeline, you hold the Lindstrom precedent from 2019. Do not let him reframe it as a procedural matter. It is substantive, and he knows it." "I know it too." Another long look. "If it goes badly, call me. I do not care what time it is." "It will not go badly," Emma said, and walked back to her desk to spend the rest of the weekend preparing. She arrived at the Whitmore building mediation suite at 8:40 on Monday morning. The room was long and neutral, with a rectangular conference table, chairs upholstered in a shade of gray that communicated absolutely nothing. Went a window overlooking a narrow alley that communicated even less. Emma set her materials at the far end of the table, organized them into 3 distinct sections, poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher provided, and sat down. At 8:58, Daniel walked in. He was alone. No junior associate, no paralegal, no support staff of any kind. He carried a single leather portfolio and a coffee from a place that was not Perch, which for a reason she refused to examine. Emma noticed immediately. He looked at her end of the table, then at the chair across from her, then at her again. "Where is Glenn?" "Unwell," Emma said. "I am handling the mediation sessions." Something passed through his expression. She could not tell if it was disappointment or recalibration or something else entirely. He set his portfolio on the table and sat down. "Emma Calloway," he said, the way people repeat a name when they are updating internal information. Still, she confirmed. He opened the portfolio. She opened her first folder, and they began. The first session was the sharpest thing Emma had experienced in 3 years of legal work. Sharper than any moot court exercise, sharper than any deposition she had sat through. Daniel operated the way she had suspected from watching him in court. With precision and patience, never overreaching, never showing impatience, he presented Raymond Mercer's position on asset division with a logic that was clean and difficult to argue against, purely on structural grounds. But Emma had spent the entire weekend finding the places where the structure was clean but the substance was not. The valuation date your client is using for the Riverside property puts it 3 months before the market adjustment, she said, sliding a document across the table. That adjustment increased the property value by 18%. Using the earlier date benefits your client by approximately $240,000. Daniel looked at the document without touching it. The valuation date is consistent with standard practice in this jurisdiction. Standard practice when the date is selected neutrally. Yes. When the date is selected specifically because it produces a favorable number, it becomes a strategic choice that we can and will challenge. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him think, which was a distinct process. It's visible in the slight stillness that came over him. When he was genuinely working through something, rather than performing consideration. What date are you proposing? The date of the formal separation filing, Emma said, which is the date consistently upheld in the Lindstrom decision in the 2 cases that followed it. He looked at her then in a way that was different from the glances across courtrooms and coffee shops. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you are genuinely updating your assessment of them. You have been doing your homework, he said. I have been doing my job, she replied. The sessions ran 3 hours each day, and by Wednesday, Emma had stopped feeling the particular low-grade anxiety of facing someone with his reputation, and had started feeling something she recognized from the best days of her work life, the focused, almost physical pleasure of a real intellectual contest. They disagreed on everything. The custody schedule structure, the educational expense allocation, the framework for reviewing the agreement annually. Daniel was methodical and immovable and consistently brilliant, and Emma matched him point for point, sometimes falling short, sometimes finding an angle that made him pause and reach for his pen. Owen, Daniel's assistant, appeared briefly on Wednesday afternoon to drop off an additional filing and found them both leaning over the same document with matching expressions of deep concentration, neither of them speaking. Owen left without announcing himself and told the story 3 times that evening, 2 different colleagues. On Thursday, it rained. Emma's car, a 9-year-old sedan that she had named Gerald in a moment of affection she no longer entirely understood, chose that particular evening to decline to start. She sat in the parking garage beneath the Whitmore building and listened to Gerald produce a sound that automotive professionals described as deeply discouraging. She called roadside assistance and was told 40 minutes minimum. She looked at the rain falling in pale curtains across the garage entrance and thought about whether this was the universe communicating something or whether it was simply a car with a bad battery. Gerald, she said to the steering wheel, is Gerald the car or someone you were expecting to rescue you? She looked up. Daniel was standing beside the driver's side window, jacket over one arm, keys in his hand, looking at her with an expression that was somewhere between amused and genuinely inquiring. The car, she said. I named it Gerald. It is a long story. I have time, he said. My car is 2 spots over. I will drive you home. I have roadside assistance coming. In 40 minutes in the rain. He looked at her steadily. Emma, I will drive you home. She sat for one more moment with the particular stubbornness of a person who has made a minor principle out of not needing things. And then she got out of the car, locked Gerald with a key because the remote had stopped working in August, and walked to the passenger side of Daniel's car without. In other words, his car was warm and smelled of leather and the faint trace of the coffee he had been drinking all week. He pulled out of the garage with the easy competence he seemed to apply to everything and joined the slow rain-thickened traffic on 5th Avenue. They were quiet for the first several Minutes in the way that people are quiet when they have spent all day talking, and the silence is not uncomfortable but simply a change of mode. "Why, Gerald?" he asked eventually. Emma looked at the rain on the window. "My grandfather's name? He taught me to drive in a car that looked almost exactly like this one. Same color, same general attitude about starting on cold mornings. He sounds like someone worth naming things after." "He was," Emma said. "He was a retired postal worker who read 2 books a week and made the best lemon cake I have ever tasted. He thought I should be an accountant." "What changed his mind?" "I argued him out of it," Emma said. "He told me afterward that anyone who could change his mind about anything had clearly found the right career." Daniel smiled at the road. It was the first smile she had seen from him that was not directed at a situation or a strategy or a moment of professional tension. It was simply a smile, quiet and genuine, and it did something unexpected to the atmosphere inside the car. "What made you choose family law?" she asked. Because the question was there, and the evening had tilted into a different register from their usual hours together. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "My parents divorced when I was 11, he said. "The lawyers they hired were more interested in billing hours than in what happened to my sister and me. I watched 2 reasonably decent people destroy each other because nobody in the room was actually paying attention to what mattered." He kept his eyes on the road. "I decided very early that if I was going to do this work, I was going to do it properly." Emma absorbed this. "Raymond Mercer is not a decent person," she said. "He has hidden assets in 3 accounts, and I am going to find all of them." Daniel glanced sideways at her. "I know," he said quietly. The admission landed between them like something neither of them had quite expected him to say. Emma turned to look at him directly and found him watching the road with an expression that was complicated in ways she was not prepared to map out entirely while sitting in his car in the rain. "Then why?" she started.
Goes.
"My job is to represent my client within the law," he said. "Not to decide for him. That is the judge's job. And yours." He stopped at a light and looked at her. "Which is why I am glad you are in that mediation room and not someone less thorough." Emma was quiet for the rest of the drive. When he pulled up outside her building and she thanked him and stepped out into the damp evening air, she stood on the sidewalk for a moment after his taillights disappeared around the corner and tried to organize what she was feeling into something manageable and logical. She could not do it. She went upstairs, called Patrice, and talked for an hour without reaching any useful conclusions except that Patrice used the word obvious approximately 7 times, and Emma disagreed with her every single time, and neither of them believed her disagreement. She hung up and sat at her kitchen table with her notes and the quiet rain against the window and the uncomfortable awareness that the line between opponent and something else had become significantly harder to locate than it had been on the morning she walked into Perch and found a stranger asking about her circling system. She opened her laptop and started working. It was safer than thinking. It was almost always safer than thinking. But the image of Daniel's profile in the rainy dark, saying "I know" with that quiet, complicated expression, stayed in the corner of her mind all night, regardless. The mediation collapsed on a Friday. Raymond Mercer walked into the final session 20 minutes late, sat down with his arms crossed, and announced that he was rejecting every proposed agreement point and wanted to proceed to trial. Daniel's expression did not change visibly, but Emma, who had spent 3 weeks studying it, saw something tighten very slightly around his eyes. That evening Glenn called from home, his voice still rough but stronger. "I am coming back Monday," he said. "Trial is set for the 12th. 2 weeks? We will prepare together." Emma said yes, and felt genuine relief, and also, underneath it, something that resembled the low-grade ache of an ending she had not been ready for. The mediation sessions were over. She and Daniel would now sit on opposite sides of a courtroom instead of opposite sides of a conference table. And the quiet, strange interlude of close quarters and rain-wet car rides would compress back into the formal distance of professional opposition. She packed up her mediation materials, that weekend and told herself this was the appropriate outcome. Glenn returned on Monday looking pale but functional, and they spent 2 days in intensive trial preparation. On Wednesday morning, Glenn called her into his office with an expression that she recognized immediately as the one that preceded genuinely bad news. "My wife called the doctor about my chest," he said without preamble. "They want me in for tests tomorrow. Emma, I cannot in good conscience sit in that courtroom and fall apart during cross-examination." "Glenn, I am not dying," he said firmly. "I am being cautious. But the trial starts in 4 days, and I need to make a decision." He looked at her steadily. "You have been carrying this case for 3 weeks. You know every document. You know the opposing strategy better than I do at this point." "Glenn, I am a paralegal. I cannot take the lead chair. You passed your bar exam 14 months ago," he said. "You have been waiting for me to formalize your associate position, and I have been moving too slowly, and that is my fault. I am correcting it now." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "I filed the paperwork this morning. You are an associate attorney at Caldwell and Briggs as of today, and I am asking you to take the lead on the Mercer trial." Emma looked at the paper. She looked at Glenn. She looked at the paper again. "He has never lost a family law case," she said. "I know," Glenn said. "Neither have you. You have just never had the chance to find that out yet." She took the paper. The first day of trial began at 9 in the morning in courtroom 4. Which had better lighting than courtroom 2 and a slightly more forgiving acoustics situation. Details Emma had noted on a preliminary visit the week before because she noted everything. She arrived at 8:15, organized the plaintiff's table with the precision of someone who understood that the physical environment of a courtroom was itself a form of communication, and sat down to review her opening notes one final time. Daniel arrived at 8:40. He came through the side door rather than the main one, which she had not expected. He stopped when he saw her sitting alone at the plaintiff's table. He looked at the empty chair beside her. He looked at her. "Glenn," he asked. "Health matter," she said. "I am lead counsel." Pause. Something moved through his expression that was more complex than anything she had seen from him across a conference table. "Emma, I know what you are going to say," she said without looking up from her notes. "And the answer is that Claire Mercer deserves the best representation available to her, and I am what is available, and I intend to be sufficient." He was quiet. Then he said, "I was going to say good morning." She looked up. He was watching her with that expression she had begun to think of privately as his honest face, the one that appeared in car rides and quiet hallway moments when the professional architecture fell slightly away. "Good morning," she said. He nodded and went to his table. The trial ran for days. Emma had expected to feel overwhelmed, and instead felt something she could only describe as clarity. The particular sharp focus that arrived when everything peripheral fell away and only the work remained. She presented Claire Mercer's case with the methodical thoroughness she had been building toward since the first morning in the courthouse lobby, documenting each hidden asset with the paper trail she had spent weeks assembling, presenting witness testimony with a precision that drew to sustained objections. From Daniel and both were overruled, she watched him work. From across the room, and felt the strange doubled experience of professional opposition and something warmer. Underneath it, that she was no longer pretending not to recognize. He was brilliant. He was also, she now understood in a way that observation alone had not fully conveyed, genuinely trying to do right by his understanding of the law, even when his client was not making that easy. On the third day, Raymond Mercer made a visible show of impatience during testimony that drew a sharp look from Judge Whitmore. Daniel leaned over and spoke quietly to his client for approximately 45 seconds, and whatever he said caused Raymond to sit back and fold his hands and look at the table for the remainder of the session. Emma noted this. She noted everything. The closing arguments fell on day 4, afternoon session. Daniel went first. He delivered 40 minutes of precisely constructed argument that drew on every strength she had identified in his pattern and several she had not anticipated. And when he sat down, the courtroom held the particular quality of silence that follows something. Genuinely impressive, Emma stood. She had spent 3 nights writing and rewriting, and finally discarding. The version of the closing, the argument that was technically perfect and starting, over with the version that was true. Glenn had taught her in her first year that the law lived in documents and precedent, but that courts were made of people and people. Responded to truth delivered with conviction. She began with Claire Mercer seated at the plaintiff's table, a woman who had built a life alongside another person over 16 years, who had made professional sacrifices and financial decisions and daily choices on the basis of a partnership that she had believed in completely. She moved through the asset documentation with clarity and specificity, anchoring each number to a human decision, a moment of trust extended and exploited. She cited the Lindstrom precedent and its successors not as technical instruments, but as the legal community's collective recognition that fairness required looking at the whole picture rather than the most convenient portion of it. She ended quietly. Claire Mercer is not asking this court for anything extraordinary, Emma said, her voice steady and clear in the high-ceilinged room. She is asking for what the law has always promised to protect, the honest accounting of a shared life. Nothing more and nothing less. We ask this court to provide it. She sat down. Judge Whitmore took the case under consideration and returned with a decision the following morning. The ruling awarded Claire Mercer the asset division Emma had argued for, including the Riverside property at the corrected valuation date, and established a custody schedule that prioritized the children's stability over either parents. Convenience. Claire held Emma's hand in the hallway outside the courtroom and said thank you 3 times, and Emma said you are welcome 3 times and meant it each time Glenn called at noon, and his voice was warm with genuine pride. The associate position is permanent, he said. When I am back next week, we will sort out the details. Emma, that was exceptional work. She thanked him and hung up and stood in the courthouse lobby for a moment with the particular feeling of having done something difficult well, a feeling she had chased since her first year of law school, and that arrived now, not with fireworks, but with a quiet, settled satisfaction that felt like the real thing. Counselor Calloway, she turned. Daniel was standing at the edge of the lobby, near the main doors, jacket on, portfolio in hand, looking at her with an expression that was entirely unlike any expression she had cataloged in 3 weeks of careful observation. It was open in a way that she had not seen from him before, unguarded and slightly uncertain, which on a man who is never visibly uncertain about anything was an extraordinary thing to witness. Congratulations, he said. It was a well-argued case. Thank you, she said. Yours was too. Pause. Outside the glass doors, the city moved in afternoon light, bright and ordinary and indifferent. I lost, he said. And the way he said it was not the way a person states a fact, but the way a person acknowledges something they had been sitting with long enough to understand it differently. You did. Emma said, I have not lost a family law case in 4 years. He was quiet for a moment. I find that I am not as bothered by it as I expected to be. Emma looked at him carefully. Why not? He met her eyes. Because the right outcome happened, he said, and because the person who produced it was someone I have a great deal of respect for. The lobby was quiet around them. A clerk crossed behind the security desk. Someone's phone rang twice and went to voicemail. Hargrove and Associates does not often lose, Emma said. What happens now? Professionally, I mean. For you? I go back to my office, Daniel said. Review the case, identify what I would do differently, and move forward. A brief pause. That is the professional answer. Is there another answer? He took 2 steps toward her, closing the distance between them to something that was no longer the measured professional space they had maintained across conference tables and courtroom aisles. This was a different kind of distance, the kind that required a decision. There is, he said, but it requires context. I am listening. He looked at her with that quiet, honest expression that she had first seen in a rainy car on a Thursday evening and had been thinking about at irregular intervals ever since. I have been in that mediation room with you for 3 weeks, he said. I have been across a courtroom from you for 4 days. And somewhere in that time, I stopped thinking of you as opposing counsel. What did you start thinking of me as? Someone I want to have a conversation with that does not involve asset valuation timelines, he said. A conversation where you order coffee from Perch and I order something from wherever. I order coffee and we sit across from each other because we want to rather than because a judge ordered it. Absorb this with the careful attention she applied to important things. You want to have coffee with me? She said. I want to have coffee with you, he confirmed. And after that, if the coffee's good, dinner. And after that, whatever comes after that, approached with the same thoroughness you applied to finding those hidden assets. Emma thought about Patrice saying obvious 7 times. She thought about Glenn saying you are what is available and I intend to be sufficient, which had turned out to be true. She thought about a rainy garage in Gerald's. Bad battery, and a man saying I know with a complicated expression that had told her something before she was ready to hear it. I won. Condition, she said. Name it, if we are ever on. Opposite sides of a case again. It stays entirely professional until the verdict. Agreed without reservation, he said immediately. And you stop arriving 2 minutes late to things. He tilted his head slightly. That was deliberate. I was curious how you would respond, and you bought a digital chronometer, he said, which was the most impressive overreaction I have ever witnessed, and I have been in depositions that lasted 11 hours. It was a real laugh, unguarded and surprised out of her. And she watched Daniel Hargrove, the most feared family law attorney in New York, look at her with the expression of a man who had just discovered something he had not known he was looking for. Tomorrow morning, Emma said. Perch, 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, he agreed. And I will be on time. I will believe that when I see it. Then I suppose you will have to see it, he said, and smiled at her. That quiet, genuine smile she had first noticed in a rainy car. And this time, she did not look away. They walked out of the courthouse together into the bright, ordinary afternoon. Not as opposing counsel, and not yet as whatever they were going to become, but as to people who had spent 3 weeks in close quarters, discovering that the person across the table was considerably more interesting than the case between them, and who had finally, with the last gavel strike of a well-argued trial, run out of professional reasons to pretend otherwise. Emma pulled her coat against the October air. Daniel fell into step beside her on the courthouse steps, unhurried, as he always was, as if the city moved at whatever pace he decided was appropriate. This time, Emma found she did not mind that quality at all. She found, in fact, that she was beginning to think it suited him rather well.